So I'm going to start just giving a little bit of an overview. First, my name is Pam Wallace, and I direct Safe Tech Forward here in Michigan. And pretty much for my work with safe technology, I work with national and international leading experts in science, medical professionals, engineering, tech professionals to educate policymakers, the public, and industries on the biological harms from wireless radiation and the environmental harms from wireless radiation. And so we also help point the way to safer technological practices. So I do a lot of working with parents like John and Stacy, policymakers, and really there's a comprehensive group of people working together to make sure that you guys have the information you need and our policymakers have the information that they need to make their best technological choices. So for just the outline for the evening, I'm going to introduce you to Stacy and John Barnes. For those of you who don't know them, they are the parents that got us involved in what's going on in Birmingham schools with technology. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Kent Chamberlain. Then we'll have a Q&A session. And there will be some resources that we will be putting in the chat for you should you have questions and want to look into this further. If you want to be actually leaving your contact information for John and Stacy to follow up with for more information on this and just for keeping in touch about what's going to be going on in the community, we're going to put a Google Doc in there where you can just leave your information. It will be private just for John and Stacy and yourselves. So I'm going to start by saying this is John and Stacy Barnes, and John and Stacy contacted me about 3 years ago out of concern about a couple of cell towers at the high school and wanted to take a deeper look. They'd been hearing some things about the current research with technology that were concerning to them, and they wanted to take a deeper look. And they also wanted to help begin the conversation with the district so that the district could have a more expert view on this. They wanted to contact some of the leading experts so that the schools could have the information they needed to make their best decisions about technology at school. So I'm going to let John and Stacy tell you a little bit about themselves and speak for just a minute.
Hold on. Oh, we're unmuted now. Okay, yeah, so we're Stacy and John Barnes. So initially we knew nothing about wireless technology or any dangers. We weren't concerned with cell towers. If we were, we wouldn't have bought a house where we did. Our home backs up to the 3 cell phone towers at Groves High School. And it wasn't until my daughter's physician, one of my daughters has an autoimmune disorder. And so it was her physician that made us aware of wireless radiation and that could be hindering my daughter's ability to heal from her autoimmune disorder. So when we realized that we had cell phone towers in our backyards, we were contacting a building biologist who came to our home and confirmed it's probably not safe to live here. The levels in our backyard were 20 times higher than what is considered safe. And then fortunately I went to an event where Pam was speaking and I started learning more and contacted her, and she has been so helpful in just trying to get across to the superintendent and the school board and trying to present ourselves as that we're parents who are concerned and we're wanting to be allies with you in this, and just making sure that the schools and the district and the residents who live around these schools are safe. So we're hoping to start a committee and putting together a committee. We have 2 board members right now that we believe are interested in this who have contacted us, and so we have to confirm that, but we're hoping to start a committee. So if anybody on the call would be interested in joining us potentially in that committee, we're just hoping to maybe meet monthly to continue to look at research and be in touch with experts like Dr. Chamberlain, and to be able to make recommendations to the board and to the superintendent, and hopefully be able to make some good progress. And even if it's baby steps, just taking some baby steps towards good progress in making it safe for the schools and the districts around them. Anything?
No.
Okay, summed it up well.
Okay, guys, thanks very much. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Kent Chamberlain. He is the past chair and professor emeritus in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of New Hampshire. Chamberlin received his PhD from Ohio University, specializing in computational electromagnetics, He has more than 35 years in academia, and he's an award-winning researcher and teacher. His research has been devoted to modeling radio wave propagation, including interfering radon or radiation from computing devices and wave phenomena in the human body. He has also served as the associate editor for the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. Sorry, guys, this is a mouthful. A lot. He's performed research for more than 25 sponsors, including the National Science Foundation. He's received 2 Fulbright Awards, including the prestigious Fulbright Distinguished Chair, which he served in Aveiro, Portugal. He's currently a founder in a high-tech startup company, and he continues to be very active in performing research and in publishing. Recently, Dr. Chamberlain was asked to serve on the state of New Hampshire's 5G Commission for Wireless Safety. And he now currently educates legislators, policymakers, and the public on the commission's findings on wireless safety. And he provides some of the most comprehensive information on the topic to date. He's here with us this evening to share the findings of the commission and what schools, parents, and everyone need to know about wireless and safety. So without further ado, Dr. Kent Chamberlain.
Thank you, Pam. So as you mentioned, there's a lot to tell. And what I'd like to do is address your particular questions. And since it's a small group, I'd like to invite you to help me along in this, I won't call it lecture, but I'll call it an information exchange. You know, if there were a lot of people here tonight, I'd say, man, don't ask your questions till the end, and I'd give a formal presentation. But considering the amount of information that I can give, what I'd like to do is start off with kind of a brief presentation, a brief overview, and then stop at that point and see what questions you might have. If you don't have them, I have plenty of more information I can go through. So I don't want to go and tell you things that you already know. I want to tell you things that are going to be meaningful for you, and hopefully things that you may not be aware of. So having said that, the next step is for me to share my screen and get into the presentation. And I'm right now assuming that you can see my slides. Anybody want to nod? Okay, so this is the presentation for you. And what I need to also start off with is a conflict of interest statement. Thanks to Pam's introduction, you have a sense of who I am in terms of my career, but you need to know who I am as a human being or as a person, because there are a lot of people out there who are getting paid a lot of money to tell you things that aren't true. For those of you who may have been at the last meeting that I was at for Birmingham schools, you know that somebody was brought in from the telecom industry to tell you that cell phone radiation isn't a problem. So for me to tell you something that's the opposite, I want you to know who I am and why I'm telling you what I'm telling you. So it was pointed out, I was chair of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and because of that, I'm generally in favor of technology. I wouldn't be teaching in an area that I had a bias against. I served, and you can see it here, on the Interoperability Advisory Board. This is a high-tech institution, a laboratory within the university, and they're oriented towards high-speed networking. I active in Project 54. It's a project funded by the Department of Justice to install electronics into safety equipment and make sure that they have all the communications they need. And I'm saying that in particular because people say that, you know, well, it's going to cut out, you know, any emergency communications. Well, I'm very sensitive to that. And anything that I'm proposing tonight doesn't interfere with emergency communications. It just makes things safer for people in terms of radiation exposure. I've been on a couple of school boards, and I'm on one right now. I'm the vice chair. I'm about to become the chair of that school board. So I'm very sensitive to the concerns of a school board and also to the responsibilities of school board members. They not only have fiduciary responsibility, but they're also responsible for the safety of the children in their school. I served on the commission, and this is important, without any compensation. This is New Hampshire. We don't pay our legislators, and we don't pay people to be on commission. So whatever I did for free, and I didn't even get compensated for travel. And then I've done a lot of follow-on work, as Pam mentioned. So I've been speaking to groups like you to kind of spread the word. Here's what you need to know about radiation. And so the bottom line is I'm speaking to you as a fellow citizen. I'm a dad, I've had kids in school, and I understand, well, what I understand is what I would like other schools to do, and what I wish had been done in our kids' school was to protect them against radiation exposure. So moving on, the commission itself, oops, yep, I skipped one. You need to know about that too. So what was this commission? And it was formed by bipartisan legislation, and it was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. So I really hadn't known ahead of time before serving on the commission what a commission entailed. But in New Hampshire, it's taken pretty seriously. Like I say, it's bipartisan legislation, had to get voted through both houses of the legislature and had to be signed by the governor. And it's the first legislation passed in the United States calling for the formation of a commission, and we are the first commission. So there aren't a lot of places where this type of information, the type of information I'm talking about tonight, can get to you. And the one reason that the required legislation and all that to get the commission formed is they wanted to form a commission that would be believed, so that when we got done making our pronouncements, people wouldn't say, oh, you had a bunch of hacks on that commission, a bunch of good old boys. And that wasn't the case. And by the way, I'm hoping these slides will be made available to you, because you can click on any of these hyperlinks and it'll bring you to the actual legislation and the final report and things like that. Continuing on with the commission, in the final analysis, you can see the backgrounds of the people that were on the commission: physics, toxicology, electromagnetics. That was my area. As you heard in the introduction, my specialty area is computational electromagnetics, but I'm also, I do radio frequency engineering. So I was able to inform the commission about things relating to my specialty area. We met for a year and we heard from experts. And one thing is worth noting here is that all of the experts we brought in were unpaid except for one. And that was the one expert who was brought in by the telecom industry. And that was the only expert that said, no, there's no harm with radiation exposure. So very similar to the experience that you had in bringing in the expert from telecom in your last meeting, or the last meeting that discussed it. But we saw the same thing. And I continue to see that. I have yet to hear somebody say that radiation exposure is okay, except, if I hear that, I know that the person is affiliated with the telecom industry. So the conclusions, and you can see the final report here, it's 390 pages, but basically the first 15 pages contain all, the basic conclusions, and then the rest is just appendices. So you can click on that here if you'd like to see it. Our finding is cell phone radiation, and here's the bad news: the cell phone radiation, including 5G, poses a significant health threat to the environment and to human health. So that's the bad news. The good news, and I can say this as an electrical engineer specializing in this area, is that there's a lot we can do to really minimize that risk. And it's just nobody's done it so far. And the reason is that it costs money to implement safety. And that's unfortunate. And it seems like the industry is unwilling to do that right now. We also concluded this isn't a scientific issue, and I can delve into the science to as far as you'd like tonight. And you'll see that it's not really a scientific issue. The science is pretty clear, but it is a political issue. So I can talk about the peer-reviewed science. I have slides to talk about that. And as I mentioned, that this technology can be used to significantly lower that exposure, but that costs money. And right now it appears the industry is not worth it. We're ready to do that. So again, I'm going as far as I want to, and then we'll have a little bit of a pause to start the questions if you have them. So here's the key question, and that is, what do we know about placing antennas near people? And here's a classic, and one reason I'm using this is it's very well documented what happened here. And when I tell you, or I give you the answer to this question, you're going to say, why haven't I been reading about that? That should be front page news. And when you think about it, though, who is going to tell you? I'm not being paid right now, but I'm telling you, and how many people are willing to do that? You can pay people, and the industry has a lot of money to pay people to say, oh, the radiation is harmless, but who's going to tell you that it's a problem? I mean, if you look at the links I'm attaching to these slides, you'll see that yes, it's well documented, but it's not well publicized. Another factor you need to consider is who are major contributor or major advertisers for a lot of media. Well, they're going to be cell phone industry. They're going to be advertisers. And so if you have a paper or any type of news outlet, you're going to be very careful in criticizing the industry that does so much advertising through you. So that's why you haven't heard the answer to the question that's being posed right now. So going back to this, and this happened at a number of fire stations, they thought it would be expedient, the telecom industry, to put antennas on or very near to the fire stations, places where people live and sleep and spend a lot of time. And this is not dissimilar from the orientation, as I understand it, of the towers that are near your school. So what happened? Let's click on it. So what happened when they turned the cell towers on? And this is worth reading. Within a week of installation, many firefighters developed unusual symptoms of headaches, fatigue, insomnia, memory loss, confusion, nausea, and weakness. After a time, firefighters in stations with adjacent cell towers were found to have forgotten CPR or became lost responding to a fire in a city where they grew up. And again, you can click on the link and get more information about this. Now, this didn't happen in every case where they put antennas near a fire tower. And one reason for this is that different populations of people seem to respond differently to cell phone radiation. Let me give you an example that you might relate to. Sunburn. So you take a group of people out and expose them to the sun, and some of them are going to get sunburned pretty quickly, and others, it'll take them a lot longer. I'm an example. My wife and I, she can go out for hours in the sun, nothing. I go out half an hour and I'm starting to get burned. So it seems like radiation is a little bit like that. Some people are more sensitive than others. Some people are sensitive to peanut allergies, bee stings, you name it. But in this case, turns out that some people are very sensitive. And we're talking about firefighters now. And you think of firefighters as being about as robust physically as people can get, and that's true. And also, you don't think of them as people who complain a lot, and they don't. So when you read more about this, you find out that these very robust people were brought to their knees by having cell phone antennas installed near where they worked and slept. So this is definitely a story that people should know about when you're thinking about having antennas near or on school buildings, where kids are even more susceptible to radiation than adults. And we can talk more about that later also. So you might say, oh, are these just anecdotes? Is that something that only showed up a couple times? No, it's shown up in a lot of cases. And I can't go into detail about all of them, but I will say that in the laboratory, it's been found out to be true also. So what I'm showing here is an article from a peer-reviewed journal, and it talks about the physiopsychological effects from radiation exposure. So it's well documented, and like I say, peer-reviewed journal. And the things to note here is that some of the effects that were noted in the laboratory are the same as what were experienced by the firefighters in California, and sleep disturbance, insomnia, headache, depression, depressive symptoms, fatigue, tiredness, you name it. These effects are pretty horrible, but they were replicated in the laboratory, the same symptoms that were seen in the fire station, firefighters, and have been seen in numerous locations around the country. I've just been dealing with Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where it finally took the Board of Health to unanimously vote to issue a cease and desist order against Verizon, because the Verizon had put in a tower in a neighborhood and a lot of people got sick. So we're not talking about rare instances. We're talking about something that happens on a regular basis. And here's somewhat of an insidious part of these symptoms. And that is, when you read through them, you go, isn't that part of being alive, having an occasional headache and having insomnia, being depressed? And the answer is yes. And that's the insidious part. There are other things that can cause this. Multiple chemical sensitivity is one. Drinking too much the night before is another one that can do that. But these are symptoms, and you don't want it happening to your kids. So that's the point I wanted to make there. So I've just mentioned that you don't want to put antennas on top of your school. That's kind of like yeah, don't do that. And I know that that's an issue because you do have antennas on your school. And I don't mean to be alarmist. I don't mean to be a fearmonger, but I do issue real concern about what I'm hearing is the case for your children. So if you don't want to put it on your building, where can you put it? How far back should you put a tower and call it reasonably safe? And this is a question that we're asking in New Hampshire. We've written legislation that's being voted on tomorrow. I'm a little bit nervous about that. But we took the recommendation of the New Hampshire Commission, and that recommendation is that you want to put your cell tower at least 500 meters away, or 1,640 feet away from where people live, work, or recreate. So how did we come up with that number? And I think it's informative to show you how we came up with that number. Also, I have a video on it if you want to see that, where I go into a little bit greater detail. So to get the answer, I'm going to use this example right here, and it's from an article that was covered in a period from 1996 to 2006 in Brazil. And the reason this is an important study and an important time interval is that back then, back in 1996 to 2006, that 10-year interval, almost nobody in that section of Brazil had a cell phone. And so it was up till 2011, 28% of the people in that region or in the study area had phones. So when you go back to 1996 to 2006, you can see that almost nobody had a cell phone. And the reason this is important is that what I'm about to show you are the effects of the towers themselves, of the cell towers, and not of the person's own cell phone or of their own electronics. They didn't have a lot of electronics themselves. So that's something important about this study. And what it looks at is you can read the title there, and you can also click on the link below if you want to read the entire article. It looked at the mortality by what they call neoplasia, but it's cancer. But what is the death rate from cancer as a function of the distance people live from a cell tower? And I'll be mentioning that in a moment, but I also want to mention a number there that you can see. The largest power density measured during the study was 407.8 milliwatts per meter squared. And the reason I'm pointing that out is that you'll be seeing numbers like that on another slide, and I'll show how it compares with the highest number that you're seeing there. And by the way, you're looking at a study where lots of people died from cancer, where you had a lot of high intensity radiation, and the highest radiation they measured was 407.8 milliwatts per meter squared. And we'll compare that with the standard that exists in this country.
We do have a question. Can we?
Okay, yeah.
Can we do that?
Okay, absolutely.
So Michelle's asking, how does this information relate to small cell transmitter towers on top of power lines? Should they have a setback as well?
I'm glad you asked. Thank you for that question. The answer is yes. And the reason is that, people talk about 5G, and companies will advertise 5G, but actually the name is a marketing tool. There's no defined 5G. So what they can do, and they do on a regular basis, is they take the regular cell tower transmissions, put that on a small cell tower, and they put it right out your bedroom, and it's the same signal. And that's why in our New Hampshire legislation, we're staying with that 500 meter setback for all transmissions, all wireless communication transmissions. This doesn't affect ham radios or radio stations or like that, but it does affect your cell towers. So yeah, good question. And yes, they are covered also. So they wouldn't, with the legislation that we've proposed and gets voted on tomorrow, if that gets enacted, you're not going to see cell towers where these small cells are not going to be in neighborhoods close to where people live. Here's a takeaway from that article that I mentioned on the previous slide, one that you can get to by simply clicking on it. And this blue line represents the death by cancer for the population in general. So that's not going to change with anything. But the red line represents the people in the study, and it shows the death rate by cancer as a function of distance they live from a cell tower. Now, it's encouraging to see that as you get far enough away from a cell tower, the death rate by cancer reaches the death rate by cancer for the population in general. If that weren't the case, you would know that there was a problem with the study. And also the monotonic decline with distance suggests that there is a dose-dependent relationship, which again is something that you would look for in an epidemiological study. So now the question becomes, why did you pick 500 meters? It looks like 1,000 meters would be a lot better. And certainly if you get it to be 1,000 meters, you then have the same death rate as the population in general. But we knew that would not be realistic. And so we and other researchers have picked 500 meters as being a reasonable compromise for a setback for a cell tower. So in other words, if you're living closer than that, closer than 500, matter of fact, if you're living, you can see the relationship right here. Closer you get to that cell tower, the more of a problem you have with it, the more risks you have. And I should also point out that this is for cancer only. There are a lot of other problems that occur, including diabetes, from radiation exposure. And there are some physiological or psychological problems that I mentioned earlier. So not only do you have a greater risk of cancer, but you have a greater risk of many other maladies as well. So that's how we came up with the 500 meters. And I have, like I say, a video I prepared where I talked about another way that we looked at the same, coming up with the same number. Let you know you're alone, not alone. Sometimes I bet you feel like you are alone when you're just dealing with this issue for the first time. So here's just some examples of setbacks that other communities have established. And again, these are all linkable. So you can, in some of these cases, you can look at the actual legislation. So you can protect your schools and you can protect your neighbors, in fact, with a lot of things are going on. Things are happening in this arena as more and more people like you are becoming aware of the risks of radiation. I got to admit that before I got on the commission, I thought, well, as long as you don't hold your cell phone right next to your head, there's no problem. That is the conventional, or had been the conventional wisdom up to that point. And now I'm finding out, as you're finding out, that there are risks. But as more people find out about it, the more people are being able to do things about it. This is just a partial list. There are a lot more examples that you can use if you want to try to put in your own ordinances in your town to protect yourselves. So you might want to ask, how do FCC standards compare internationally? You can see that it's pretty low in some places, although I understand the cell industry is putting pressure on Brussels to increase their standards. But you can see that in general, and this is a very incomplete list, we're up here at pretty high standards. It turns out to be 6 watts per meter squared, which is a huge amount of radiation. And I'll say more about that in just a moment. But if you want to, the other point that I wanted to make here is that what was the number we had? I said that for that Brazil study, the highest radiation they came into was with that 400. Where is that? Here we go. So it was right here about 408, I think it was. And you look at that. And so remember, that was in a study that had a lot of cancers. And this is the highest value of radiation that they came up with. Man, you might be, so that wouldn't fly in Turkey, Bulgaria, Brussels. Maybe it would fly just a little bit in Israel, but it is way below standards in the United States. So if they come out and they say, oh, it's only 1% of the FCC limit, that doesn't mean anything. And I would like to read you something now because it's important. It says a little bit about where our standards came from. So you guys mind if I read a little bit here? So the radiation thresholds currently in place date back to the 1980s and are based upon the effects of tissue heating alone. The assumption is that if a radio signal is not strong enough to warm tissue, it will not harm you. The current FCC radiation thresholds were determined from behavioral studies conducted on rats and monkeys. In those studies, the animals were exposed to increasingly higher levels of radiation until it began to affect their ability to perform tasks that they were trained to do. The animals were food deprived, and their task was to press a lever to receive food pellets. The radiation level at which the animals could no longer perform their task was designated as the upper exposure limit by the researchers. A safety factor of 50 was then applied to that number to come up with radiation thresholds for the general public. In other words, they divided the upper limit, the exposure limit, by 50 to come up with radiation exposure limits for people. Clearly, the short-term animal study based solely on heating does not provide useful information about the long-term effects from the continuous exposure that we all experience every day. I mean, as I read that, I'm still kind of stunned that we would use such a means to come up with standards for people. But that's where they come from. And those are the standards we use today. And one reason that they, in fact, a couple of reasons why the industry wants to maintain those standards, probably the number one reason is money. You know that no facility, no cell tower has ever exceeded FCC limits. And the reason for that, which we found out by doing some simple calculation, is that if you're right in front of a cell tower and you move a couple of feet away from it, a couple of meters away from it, you will not exceed that very high threshold, 10 watts per meter squared. And so that means that they never have to worry about inspections. So if people talk about coming out to make measurements on cell towers to make sure that they're within FCC limits, that is BS, because they'll never exceed those limits. It's like going out to Interstate 75 and posting a 500-mile-an-hour speed limit. They're not going to give out any tickets because nobody's going to exceed them. So excuse me for a little bit of a rant, but I felt like, I mean, every time I come across this, it makes me a little bit angry because it's the standards that are set right now are meaningless. And also it allows the FCC to put antennas in places where they shouldn't, like schools, and still be a small percentage of the FCC limits, which makes you feel fine. Oh, better about it. No, we're only 2% of the FCC limit. No, that still is way higher than is necessary to cause severe problems. Don't need to say much about this. And maybe it is time to introduce this topic right here, unless there are questions, because what the commission, when we made our initial discoveries, we did our reading, we went to the library, we brought in experts, and we've found that there are certainly harms associated with radiation exposure. So the natural questions are, what's going on with our regulatory agencies? Why aren't they protecting us? So we made numerous calls to these agencies. We contacted them, the FCC, we contacted the FDA, asked some of these questions right here. There are thousands of refereed publications showing the harm. Other countries have lower standards. Insurance companies won't touch radiation, which is something I want to talk about later because it certainly is going to impact your school administrators. But what's going on with the FCC and why aren't they protecting us? And a simple publication right here provides the answer to that. In fact, the title says what's going on. Captured agency. This isn't a conspiracy. This is a Harvard report. And so continuing with the title, how the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. I mean, that's what's going on. And if you read the article, and I put the link here also, it describes in pretty good detail what's going on with the FCC and why they aren't willing to change their thresholds or their exposure limits. Another quote here, industry controls the FCC through a soup to nuts stranglehold that extends from its well-placed campaign spending in Congress through its control of FCC's congressional oversight committees to its persistent agency lobbying. If you can, I'd suggest at least reading a little bit of that publication, and that answers the question that, why do we have these ridiculously high standards that are harming people, and why aren't our government agencies doing anything? This explains it. So continuing, just some excerpts from that, if unless people have questions, if going into that Harvard report that I just referenced, they're using a playbook similar to the one used by Big Tobacco. And so to ensure its access on Capitol Hill, the wireless industry made 26 million in campaign contributions, 2016. Actually, I have that updated, but and then in 2017, they had 87 million in lobbying. They have over 500 lobbyists. So they're paying these lobbyists to go to the legislators in Washington, and they have lots of money to help with campaign contributions. So they're doing the same thing that Big Tobacco did. Playbook's key insight is that an industry doesn't have to win a scientific argument about safety. It only has to keep the argument going. And that's why they sent somebody from the industry, an industry representative, to the last meeting. Just to keep an argument, make it sound like there is an argument. But if you read the literature, as we did on the commission, you realize there's no argument. The science is clear. Of course, Big Tobacco even is still, or at least as late as 1998, claimed that cigarette smoking doesn't cause cancer. Well, after all, 5 out of 6 smokers don't die of cancer. So clearly there's contradictions there. It doesn't cause cancer. Sorry, that was a little bit of sarcasm on my part. You can tell, I've been involved with this for a long time and trying to get the truth out. And then when I hear people from the industry make claims, it makes me, you can imagine, a little bit upset. Here's something else. And the reason I'm showing this, and at any time, if anybody wants to interrupt with questions, go ahead, because I think these are things that you might want to see, might need to see. The CTIA it's a Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association, and they're the trade group for the telecom industry. And the city of Berkeley noticed that people aren't paying attention to these safety warnings that are in their phone. I don't know if you're aware of them either, but if you dig deep enough in your phone, in fact, here's how to get there if you have an iPhone. You kind of dig down settings, general, legal, and regulatory RF exposure. It says, don't hold the cell phone next to your body. But people weren't aware of that because it was buried. So Berkeley, the town city council said, well, we should come up with an ordinance and have the people who sell cell phones give this warning, the warning that is in front of you right now. And basically that warning says that if you have your cell phone on and hooked up to a wireless network, don't put it next to your body. That's all that they wanted to do, the Berkeley City Council. And then the CTIA sued them, said, no, you can't do that. And the bottom line is the CTIA won, and they were claiming it was an infringement of their First Amendment rights because they were asked to force their retailers to say something that they didn't believe. So the industry will do a lot, and that's really my point here. The industry will do a lot to keep people from finding out that their cell phones do pose a risk.
Kent, there's a question.
All right.
Again, I'm not sure if you're going to know the answer to this one. It's about funding relocation. It's who incurs the cost to relocate these towers on school property and close to our homes. Haven't been able to get a firm answer on this in my research.
Okay, well, I do know of people who know, and we hopefully will find out based upon what's going on in Pittsfield. That's where I mentioned that the Board of Health voted unanimously to issue the cease and desist order. My understanding is it would be borne by Verizon. So they have a cell tower. It's in a place where, all of a sudden people don't want it and there's a big enough stink, they might move it. There's a lot of politics here. One thing is that if it's too big a stink, then a lot more people learn about the risks of cell phone radiation because they start asking questions. So in some cases, they will quietly, and this is what I've heard, and I don't have any formal documentation right now, but I've heard that in cases where a stink starts to develop, if I can put it that way, they will simply, the company, the cell company will go in and simply quietly move it. It's in a new place, the stink dies down, and it doesn't get a lot more people don't learn about it.
So there's another question. If a cell phone shouldn't be in a pants or shirt pocket, how far away is safe to carry it?
It's a little bit of a tough question because we think of our phones as being benign. Mine's right here. And because my wife is on the road, I have it on and I have it away from me. So there's no set answer. I don't think that I'm personally electrosensitive, but I know people who are electrosensitive, and if they had their phone on and there, it would bother them. So I would recommend that you try to figure out where your own personal thresholds are. If you don't think you're electrosensitive, you might want to keep it. You could potentially keep it away from you. Something else that I do, and even though I'm not electrosensitive, whenever I put my phone on my person, I put it in airplane mode. It still radiates a little bit. And the only way to be safe totally safe is to turn it off completely. But I think it's to find out your own limits. Over time, people who are electrosensitive, they kind of figure this out over time. They find that when their phone's on and close to them, all of a sudden they're feeling something. They put it away and put it away from them, and all of a sudden they're feeling better. So I hate to be so unscientific about it, but it is something that might vary from person to person. And Pam, you may have more experience with this than I do.
Well, and I just put something in the chat. It's called Keeping Safe with Wireless. And so the idea is distance is your friend. The reality of this is if you can put your phone on airplane mode whenever it's on your body, that's really important. Don't carry it on your body, carry it on, put it in your purse. If you're a woman, if you're a guy, you're going to just have to carry it with you. Talking about, using air tubes, not the I've forgotten even what they're called, the earbuds or the airbuds, things like that really create a lot of radiation, and it's very close to your brain. So there's a lot of best practice with cell phones and other use of, wireless modems, routers, laptops that you can get there. And it's for you and it's for your children. So you take a look at what they found in terms of our more biologically safe ways to handle and use and interact with our devices. So
Right.
if he's familiar with the chat, it's right in there. We can talk more about that too, because again, the rule is distance is your friend. And when you're not using things, having it off as often as possible. So we're going to move into another question from Colleen. Is there any link between cell phone radiation and migraines? And I can say absolutely unequivocally. I have a 14-year-old that's suffering from chronic migraines for about the past 2 years. About the same time she's been getting migraines. And is there more to that question, Colleen? I don't know if I've read it correctly.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah,
I meant to say about the same time she's had a cell phone.
Okay, yep, perfect. Yep. Kent, do you want to take that away?
Well, I just want to finish up with one other statement. We look at these devices, they are pretty amazing. I'm enamored of them as an engineer. They're amazing, but they are microwave transmitters. We don't think of them that way. We think of them as these cell phones, and they are, but they have up to 3 watts of power, which is in a microwave frequency. That's huge. And so I think just to be thinking differently about your phone and put it away, from you whenever possible, or have it in airplane mode. The one thing I do want to mention is I think this is the right. You should be able to see my phone screen right now. Am I sharing? So one thing to know is that this is the power that reaches you from your phone does vary with 1/r², where r is the distance of the phone from you. So you could have it on a table, 1 meter away, and you might get, let's call it 1 milliwatt per meter squared, which is, kind of on that threshold for a lot of people that I know. And if you move it closer to you, halve the distance, cut the distance in half, all of a sudden your power density then goes up by a factor of 4. Put it in your back pocket, then you get this very extreme radiation. And of course, you put it in your bra, and a lot of women do, and they did that. This Dolly Parton on the Super Bowl commercial. I don't know how many of you saw that, but she reached into her bra and pulled out her iPhone 6. And you may have heard a gasp from somewhere, and that may have been me, because you definitely don't want to do that. I've got studies showing, and I've got a video of a surgeon who has performed cancer surgery on a couple of women who kept their bra in, or their cell phone in their bra, and the cancers developed right under where the cell phone antennas were located. So that's definitely not something to do. So I thought I would bring this one up. So, time for questions, comments?
Yep, and we can see, does anybody else have a question that they just want to, unmute and say? And Colleen, I was going to say there's a great deal of evidence and research on migraines and headache and exposure to wireless. And so I'm going to send you some information when I can get it on my screen. I'll put it in the chat. But yes, and if she's having migraines, it's absolutely something to pay attention to. And so by adopting some of the safer practices that you can learn, you'd be surprised at how quickly these things can resolve. Another thing is insomnia, heart palpitations, anxiety, attention issues, things that people have every day. We're seeing fertility, which many of us know. You've seen such huge issues with fertility, over the last 20 years, and huge significant changes. So there's a number of things, like Kent said, that are happening that can be attributed maybe, or are being attributed to other things that are actually the result, or certainly partially the result, from the levels of exposures. We have to remember, we didn't have this level of exposure in our environment. I mean, Kent, I don't know what the baseline level of exposure used to be just in our natural environments, but Ole Johannesson says it's a quintillion times more now than it was just even 10 years ago.
And that's why I was laughing, because it's such a huge number. Right. We're not used to it. We're pretty good at protecting ourselves against ultraviolet radiation, against sunlight, and that's a pretty intense radiation source, but we have never been acclimated to the type of radiation that we've only seen in the last, 80 to 100 years. So we're not prepared to deal with it. And then things do happen. I can talk. Go ahead.
One question and a statement, if you can come back to this too. I guess I did want to touch on the FCC ruling, or the lawsuit against the FCC that was won. The Environmental Health Trust, a month or so ago, a few months ago.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, the one question is, any thoughts about, in our particular situation, right, with cell phone towers on school property, and they get money for us. There's a financial incentive, obviously, for them to do it. You talked about, like in New Hampshire, if the lawyer hopefully gets passed tomorrow about the 500 or the 500 meter setback.
Yeah.
This is you can't give us a specific answer, I know, but in a broad sense, how would you go about in a community where, we can't take cell phone towers out of communities, right? As you in your entry, you're not anti-technology, you're in that industry, or that business. But how would you look at where would they go? I mean, it's easy to say they shouldn't be here. That's easy to say, but they're going to go somewhere else.
Well, and keep in mind too, so Kent, our school district, between 3 different schools, they have 8 cell phone towers. So behind our home at Groves High School, there's 3 around the football field. Another high school has the same thing, 3 around the football field. And then the middle school has them right on the back of the building. There's 2 there. So we're talking about 8 cell phone towers. So we're trying to figure out how on earth to realistically ask them to get 8 cell phone towers off of school property.
Well, I have an answer, and it does involve money, as you can imagine. Here's a situation that I was brought into in Lenox, Massachusetts. That's where Kripalu Institute is. And what the company wanted to do, the cell tower company wanted to do, was go to a home for the disabled and the elderly, and they wanted to put antennas on top. And of course, I was horrified, and I gave a presentation that included this slide right here, because here's what they wanted to do. And they wanted to put the antenna right here in this middle, and they wanted to provide coverage in the surrounding area. Now, from a cost standpoint, and assuming that the radiation wasn't harmful, this makes great business sense. There are roads already there. There's the infrastructure there. You simply plug into existing utilities, put your antennas there, and you probably make the installation in a couple of days or even less than that. that's the cheap way to do it. And like I say, it would make great sense if radiation weren't harmful. And this is the situation that you are dealing with right now. Somebody has come in, they've put antennas in a populated area. It makes sense from a cost standpoint for them, but people are becoming excessively radiated from all that we found on the commission. This is not my opinion. This is what the commission found. So an alternative to that would be to find some location, some other location. I'm putting the red dot as a possible location. There are a number of them around, and there are for most cities, in most towns. And what you can do is put in a tall tower there and simply have a directive antenna that radiates into the desired coverage area. You could put antennas around that tower, and you could shape where you wanted to get the desired coverage area, and it works wonderfully. And nobody gets excessively radiated. And remember, I'm a radio frequency engineer. I'm telling you, this can happen, and it works beautifully. But think of the cost differential. If you did locate here, you'd have to lease the land. You'd have to provide some sort of access to that, put in a road of some sort, maintain that road. You have to run utilities and then run in the telecommunications and lines also. So one option is going to be very inexpensive. You do it in a day or so. And this one's going to be a lot more expensive. Now, in a lot of situations, there are already existing towers, and there are structures, there are ways that you could put an antenna in that would give you the desired coverage, but it would not be right on a populated area where people live, work, eat, recreate, etc. So yeah, it can be done. And that was, that's my answer, kind of a long answer to the question you posed about what can you do? Yeah, there always seem to be options. I can think of very few cases where there aren't options.
Yeah, and if you or Pam, can you just comment for the people on the line if they're not aware of the Environmental Health Trust lawsuit against the FCC that was a few months ago? That was kind of it's not a conclusion, right? But it's a good first step.
It sure is.
Looking at their 20-year-old or even older standards.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so let me show that. And here we go. Assuming you can see it now. And so here's what happened with the lawsuit. And it has the link here if you want to get more information about it. Basically, and here I have the lawsuit itself, and then the press release about the findings from it on the next slide. So you can check that out if you do when you get the slides. And so here's what they were claiming in the lawsuit. And that is the FCC ignored substantial record evidence when it decided its RF exposure limits were adequate. And you heard me just say that, and I gave examples and I compared it with other countries, and they simply have been stonewalling this and stonewalling everybody. And a lot of people have been asking about, getting more realistic standards. And then the, violating the Administrative Procedures Act, because again, they were pretty arrogant about it. They just said, well, these standards are fine. We don't have to do much. And so they really ignored the procedures that they were supposed to go through. They didn't do anything with the environmental policy because, again, they ignored it. And this is something I didn't mention earlier, and that is, yes, the radiation is harmful to human health, but it's also harmful to even trees, to vegetation. It's harmful to insects. So we know about insecticides being bad for insects, but when you couple it with cell phone radiation, it does some pretty nasty things. I mean, if you put a cell phone, a working cell phone, in a beehive, I'm told that the hive will collapse. So there are some things, in terms of the environment that were just completely ignored by the FCC. So this is what the lawsuit was all about. And you can read the details if you like. And then the victory is that the judges ruled against the FCC and even described some of what they did, some of what the FCC did as being arbitrary and capricious. So it may be that there are cracks in the dam, chinks in the armor, if you will. With the FCC, they've been controlling things for so long. And finally, people are starting to find ways to make that crumble, if you will, so that they hopefully will have to reevaluate their standards and come up with something more realistic and safer for the population. Here.
Hey, Kent, I had another question too.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So what you said was going to be determined tomorrow or decided on tomorrow about the 500-meter setback.
Yeah.
So how long, in your opinion, would that take to trickle down to other states? Because that would just apply to New Hampshire then, correct?
Well, it would apply just to New Hampshire. And
Yeah.
I'm a believer in the tipping point. So I don't know if you read the book, Malcolm Gladwell, but just that, that when pressures start building, and you can see it with the Health Trust victory, the EHS victory against the FCC, that's a chink in the armor, and people are starting to get wins around the country. They're able to get things like setbacks in Ithaca, New York is one of them. And I hear about it because these are people that I worked with, that ruling by the Board of Health in Pittsfield, Mass. So it could be that this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's obvious to people who hear the evidence, who hear presentations like the one that I'm giving now, and I hope this is what you're walking away with. Hey, this is real. It's dangerous. The FCC should be protecting us. And then what happens is the politicians kind of are on board too. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of influence, as you saw by the dollar amounts I showed on a previous slide. There's a lot of influence by the lobbyists in the telecom industry. But still, you got people who have to get voted in. And if people are seeing that their politicians aren't supporting the right side of this, and in other words, by helping protect against radiation exposure, they're going to be out of office. So I think that there can be a tipping point, and I am hearing some very positive things from legislators. And I got to say, I'm a little bit concerned about the vote tomorrow, because one reason, the legislation had been in committee, and the committee had voted, tacitly voted to recommend it for interim study. But then some people were saying, no, we want to vote on it because this is too important. Now, it could mean that the lobbyists got to them and they want to have a full vote so that they can kill it. Or it could be that they legitimately see the value of the legislation we're proposing. So keep an eye out for it. You'll probably be able to find it pretty easily tomorrow. New Hampshire legislation and on tower setbacks. Oh, by the way, the number of the bill is 1644. So it's HB 1644. You should be able to find out how things go. And I'll be very sad if it doesn't pass, but I am seeing that a lot of people, including us, are getting traction. And you're going to get traction too, because you start telling people about this, and you start seeing that the things that you've been told about radiation and the negative things about it are true, then just more and more people know about it. And then I think that things will happen. I tend to be an optimist, but I believe that's the case. Oh, something else I wanted to mention is that as you can imagine, have given a presentation similar to this one on numerous occasions. And I usually ask people or suggest that they try, if they have insomnia or headaches, which most people do from time to time, I've suggested that they turn off their electronics at night. And so I've had a good number of people get back to me and say, well, I've turned off my router. We turned off all of our cell phones. And by gosh, we noticed that we're sleeping better. Is that placebo effect? I don't know, but I do recommend that to you. Pass the word along. If anybody's suffering from any of the things that I've shown on the slides, give it a try. It doesn't hurt anything. It saves a little bit of battery life or whatever, but you might notice that some symptoms that you thought were just part of everyday life, you might find that they go away. I hope that's the case for you.
Well, and Kent, I've just been chatting with someone about that. And I think that's a very important thing for people to realize is that, turning things off at night, what I was sharing is the night in their evening is when our body's biologically repaired.
Right.
You have RF in your environment, it pulses and it basically interferes with that process. So we end up with a lot of the repair work that should be done, the cleansing that should be done isn't being done. And so we're ending up with the biological effects. So if turn your wireless routers off at night, turn all of your wireless, and that includes Alexas, that includes, anything in the house that's wireless. And we have so much these days. But I think the strongest intervention you can do right now is to mitigate by turning these things off in the evening. If you have people in the house who are having headaches, depression, anxiety, these are steps, like Kent said, that can give you a very good indicator about whether you're dealing with a response to wireless. The other thing is wireless affects blood sugar. There's a lot of studies on that, and things like headaches and migraines are very strongly linked to blood sugar imbalances and also hormonal changes, which again, this is a hormonal disruptor. So all of these things can be working together to be creating some of the biological effects that we're seeing. Again, it can just be some very small things that can make a big difference. People have asked how long. Usually we see changes in like a week or two, but I always say, I taught in school for many, many years, and we worked on interventions for different behaviors and biological effects on things. Give something a month of consistent trial to see whether or not you're seeing a difference. But thankfully with RF, oftentimes it's like a week or two and you're seeing a pretty big difference. Kent, there was a question too about, and I answered it, but I wondered if you could go above it. The scanners at the airport now that use the millimeter wave. So I told the person that it does cause biological harm. They're 5G, they're millimeter, well, they're not 5G, they're millimeter waves. Do you have any thoughts on that? I know that the TSA, people who've manned the scanners are having high incidence of cancers and biological problems now, but do you have any more to add to that? So something to be aware of.
Well, I understand that you can go and ask to be manually, patted down. And so if you think you're electrosensitive, or if you've gone through those scanners before and you've had a reaction to it, that's my best recommendation. So I think with a lot of the devices that we have, and we're getting into the idea that car radars, which are operated up at 77 gigahertz, do they affect people? Some of these things we really don't know about. And we've going full tilt boogie right into this, installing these great devices, potentially accident preventing devices, but we haven't really explored them enough. We just keep going forward with it without asking the question, are these devices harming people? So just exercise caution where you can. If you can, wire up your internet. I'm talking to you from a wired computer. Just to do your best to eliminate the exposures in your life, because there's evidence that suggests that it's cumulative. In other words, you may not be electrosensitive today, but who knows, you could be later on as exposures continue. I did want to follow up with something about you said about blood sugar. And, this is for real. And this is an article, and a peer-reviewed article. And it looked at the blood sugars in students attending 2 different schools. One of the schools had something like 5 times the radiation because it was close to a tower than the other school. And what they found is that the students that were more exposed had the types of blood sugar profile that looked like pre-diabetes than the students in the school that had lower radiation. So what you were saying, Pam, is spot on. And there's another report coming out soon. It's in the process right now that shows even more profound impacts on blood sugar for young people from radiation. So just be aware this is a real thing. And as you look at the whole picture, it's not just something like getting headaches, but it's a whole panoply of ailments that can occur as a result of radiation exposure. And the effect, or what's causing that, is what's called oxidation. And what sometimes when you talk about ionizing radiation, this is something I'm not sure if you're familiar with. Ionizing radiation is above ultraviolet. And an example of that would be X-rays. We know that that's dangerous, and we know why it's dangerous. We've known that for a long time, that you can mutate DNA with ionizing radiation. But cell phones are in a category that we're referring to as oxidative radiation. You know about free radicals, that you eat and oxidizing foods and oxidizing things that you can do. And that's why we take antioxidants to slow the aging process. But it turns out that radiation from cell phones exacerbates oxidation exacerbates aging. So just be aware of that, if you want to come up with a name for cell phone type radiation, it's going to be oxidative radiation. So keep taking your antioxidants, eat those blueberries, but also turn off your cell phone. It'll be doing roughly the same thing, or moving it in the right direction.
Hey, Kent, this is Bill Lamont. I live in Franklin. Franklin size is about 10,000 linear feet by 10,000 linear feet. So we're pretty small, and making that 1,500-foot setback is nearly impossible. But is that the only mitigating factor that affects the RV, or is there anything else we can do?
So in every case that I've seen, so even though a municipality could be very small, you still can move an antenna far away and have a directive antenna focus its energy on that area from far away. So if you do it from far away, then everybody gets a low exposure. But one thing nice about being on a tower far away and high up is you get a very uniform coverage area. So even though it may not be that you could put a tower in your municipality, you could put one far away and have it service your municipality.
We have 5 towers on the perimeter of our town, which still don't service us well. And it's a tough issue.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'd have to look at the map of it. And I have done siting as part of my career, where I would say, somebody would say, we want coverage right here. How can we do that? Where do we have to put the antenna?
Well, we'll have to talk. Thank you.
Yeah, but something else I want to say is that you can get 20 miles coverage. So if you can find a space within 20 miles that can beam the energy in your direction, then you've got great coverage.
We have lots of hills and trees too, which doesn't help.
No. And I've done a lot of work with that, with modeling the effects of trees and terrain. And I find you can usually get away. In fact, in almost every case that I've seen, you can get around it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm trying to get another thing here to show. In the meantime, any other questions?
Okay, well, maybe, I guess more of a comment, but what we've learned is from you others that there's really no overarching rules or framework for where these towers go up. In other words, it feels like, maybe because there's multiple companies, I'm not sure, but it feels like there's oversaturation. I mean, we have ones in our backyard, but we go less than a mile away and we see 2 more. I mean, they're all over the place. So, am I correct? There's really no overarching, again, guidelines or framework for where these towers are put, independent of humans living. But as the town could have dozens of them, and it just feels like overkill. Is that overkill because they can get away with it and it's relatively cheap to kind of oversaturate an area, or is it because there's different companies, Verizon, AT&T, all that stuff, different, leasing different spots on those towers?
So I don't know a definitive answer. They consider such information to be proprietary, but what I have been able to glean from from what I do know is that it's just looking there, it's opportunistic. That even though they may not need the towers that they have in right now, they expect to need it in the future. They're really planning on people doing a lot more with high data rate devices. I think that we as a society have to question whether or not we really need that. So they're overbuilding. From what I've seen and heard, they're overbuilding right now with the anticipation that they're going to need that capacity later on, and then they'll be able to charge for it. So they've bought in, well, it's cheap, and well, they're able to put towers wherever they want, with the understanding that they probably won't be able to do this for long because people are catching on. Actually, I've got a slide that somewhat addresses that. Bear with me just a second. Yeah, here we go. When I say that they already know that that people are catching on, I have a slide that kind of shows that. Share my screen. So here's what they're telling their shareholders. and this is from their report, their shareholder report, our wireless business also faces personal injury and wrongful death lawsuits relating to alleged health effects of wireless phones and or radio frequency transmitters. We may incur significant expenses in defending these lawsuits. In addition, we may be required to pay significant awards or settlements. So that just shows they know what's going on, and they know that people are catching on, and that's one reason they're pumping money into sending people out to promote their viewpoint, and that is that wireless is harmless. Nonetheless, no insurance company will deal with this issue. So you try to go out and get wireless protection even from the Lloyd's of London, and they insure anything. It just won't happen. And your school administrators need to know this also. Because if harm is happening, people are acknowledging it. I'm testifying in a lawsuit where somebody says making a lawsuit because of harm from radiation. And so this is going to happen more and more. And if there's no insurance company to cover those expenses, as there was with asbestos, then the people are going to go after the schools, the administrators. They're personally liable. And I don't mean this as a threat. I mean, this is somebody who is on a board of trustees for an educational institution, and it's something that we're thinking about. And so there are things that schools should be doing right now to kind of move in the direction of lowering the radiation exposure for its students. And if it requires moving a cell tower, they should do it even though they're going to lose revenue, because the cost to their students in terms of health and the behavior of those students is significant and should not and no longer be just ignored.
And I guess one thing you mentioned too, part of this is baby steps, right? There's where we are, and maybe there's a theoretical zero, but that's either, depending on your mindset, either unrealistic or just takes time, right? You got to work your way down, one step at a time, one step at a time. Just you said wiring your house is step one, right? Or maybe,
Yeah.
but you still have a cell phone. So, even you aren't in a zero radiation environment right now. And one last thing, the insurance not covering this, has it always been that way, or have they been pulling those out of their, of their statements over the last couple of years?
From what we saw on the commission, insurance has never insured against radiation and damages. And so what you were saying is really important about taking those baby steps. I mean, if nobody in your household seems to be experiencing any of those symptoms, it's still a good idea to to wire your computers, to just be a little bit more careful about how much radiation you expose people to. And from a school standpoint, schools started off with Ethernet years ago, and in almost all schools, unless it's a brand new school building. So they may be able to go back and resurrect that. And in fact, if they do, they'll probably find a cost savings, because one thing about wireless devices is that they have to be replaced or repaired every 5 years or so is a typical number. But when you have wired, you plug it in and it'll last for decades. So it's called future proofing if you use wired connections compared to wireless connections, which are going to be a soak of money over a period of time. So if your school says, okay, we're going to take some steps, that protects them, because at least they're moving in the right direction and they're acknowledging the problem and trying to mitigate it. But if they do nothing, that's where they're liable from what I've seen. And like, I'm not doing this as a threat. I'm just saying what I've been told.
I did want to say that there's a couple of things. One, Frank Clegg, the former president of Microsoft Canada, actually worked with a school in Ontario to address their radiation levels in the school. And they were able to reduce radiation levels by 90% and still maintain wireless usage. So there's a number of things that can be done, even in your home. You can get adapters. So you might be using a laptop or an iPad or an iPhone. You can get an adapter for it and wire it, but it can be moved around to where you need it to be. So there are a number of different solutions, and there are things that need to be explored that aren't really commonly being explored at this point. So this is one of the things that we're doing, is working to let people know, families know, schools know, policymakers know the types of things that they can do to reduce these exposures. The other thing is that wireless actually isn't our future. It's fiber is our future. Fiber is quite a bit faster. Wireless will never be at the speeds of fiber. And the United States is actually number 14 in its internet speeds and reliability and safety in the world. The highest are all fiber-based systems. So we can have a hybrid of fiber-based systems to home and wireless only when needed. Wireless can be looking at other frequencies. We can be looking at things like Li-Fi. There's all sorts of different things in the works right now that may not have the same biological impacts. So as Kent was talking about, one of the reasons we have what we have is one, the belief that this is innocuous. There's no harm at all in wireless. So that's very pervasive. And two, because it's very inexpensive to go about doing the infrastructure the way that they're doing it. When we start to add these other safety measures, it does take more time and it may take a little bit more money. At the same time, wireless is constantly upgrading. So when you look at like a infrastructure, we're laying 5G infrastructure everywhere. Well, how many years is it going to be? 5 years, 6 years, where we're having to scrap this completely and then move to 6G. When you're looking at fiber, it's there, it's stable forever. And it also closes the digital divide. And a lot of people don't know that fiber has been, basically we've paid for it in our phone bills for, I believe, the last 20 years. So there has been money collected to lay a fiber system that was never installed. So there's a number of threads to this conversation. And the good news is there are solutions. And so we're just kind of walking people back to getting to the things that we already know, and then discovering even safer ways to live and utilize all of the benefits of our modern technology. So I didn't mean to take over with that, Kent. I just
beautifully said. Perfect.
Things. And so is there anything else you would like to share with us this evening and wrapping up?
Just to reiterate what I said before, and that is the only people I've heard say that wireless radiation is safe are those with affiliations to the cell industry. And if anybody tells you that it's safe, ask them who they're working for, ask them who they're getting paid by. And in every case where I've done that, I found out that, yeah, they're indeed working for the cell industry. Sometimes they won't say it right out, but you can, go onto the internet, find out who they work for or who they've worked for in the past. And I always have found that connection. So I'm here for free because I think you need to know this information. And Pam's doing a lot of your work for free also. So we just feel like you need to know. Our children's health are at risk.
So we do have one more question. Are earbuds okay?
No. And there are examples that I've heard about from people who put them in and they get a headache. They take them out, their headache goes away. They are fairly low power. They're based on Bluetooth, as you know. And Bluetooth can go up to 100 milliwatts, which is significant. And I think that they're probably using less power than 100 milliwatts, but the fact that it's right in your ears and radiating it's a microwave transmitter, it's a low power, but still that energy is going somewhere and a lot of it is going into your head. So I hate to say it because my kids love their AirPods. And then when I told them about it, they were really bummed that they wouldn't be able to keep using them. So you just watch out for those and any other wireless device. They all radiate the same type of radiation, and that type of radiation has been shown to cause problems. We didn't find that much of a difference in the commission when we looked from basically 6 megahertz on up. We can't, I think that more research has to be done. It may be their sweet spots in that frequency spectrum, but we weren't able to identify it, and it can't be identified with the limited research that's been done. So,
and then they asked, what about the plug-in ones, not the Wi-Fi ones?
Oh, fine. That's fine. Absolutely. Plug it in. That's what I use. So you plug it in, you get the same audio quality basically and the same quality microphone. You just have the cord. And of course, then the question is where do you hold your cell phone so it's not near you? But there are solutions to that too.
Okay, well, so any last questions before we just do a little bit of housekeeping? Okay, so I'm going to put in the chat. One of the goals of this evening is to connect you guys as a community to Stacy and John, and to take a look at what you will be doing as a community to take this issue forward, especially in your schools. As I said, Stacy and John have been working on this for about 3 years. So when you talk about baby steps, they're very cognizant of what it takes to really work with a big entity like a school system, and to really ask them to take a look at one of the more foundational pieces that they have is their educational system. 21st century learning very much revolves around our technology. So there's been a lot of patience, and there needs to be a lot of patience in taking this on, but the hopes is to form a committee so that you can take a deep dive look at this to get some safer technological practices going at the school. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. I'm also, Andy also put in a document that if you would like to add your contact information to be in touch with Stacy and John, you can add that. It'll be just confidential. And I'm also going to put some physician-based websites that have a great deal of information on this topic, so that you can look at whatever it is. I mean, certainly this can take months and years of deep dive. So take it at your own pace. Take a look at little things that you can do, and just take little steps, being a little bit safer in your lives and in your families with technology. So, Kent, any closing thoughts, or did you just kind of give them?
I think that's about it.
Okay.
And if people have questions, they can email me, and I'd be happy to answer them. Just good luck in processing this information. There's a lot out there, a lot to digest, but I hope this was a start, and I hope this helped.
Do you want to put your email in the chat, Kent?
Sure will.
Okay, and Stacy and John, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you for both of you for being here tonight to present. And thank you for people who took time out of their evening to be on the call, and hoping you weren't too overwhelmed by the information. But like they said, hopefully you can take some baby steps and help us in just making more people aware and trying to make our school district safer.
So if you're interested in this information, please just take a look at the chat now. We've got the physicians-based researched websites, Dr. Chamberlain's email, my email, and the Google Doc. So if you want to copy the chat and take that information out of there. And thank you guys all for coming. Again, this is a very big issue. We know it's a lot to digest, and there are a lot of implications. But again, we want to emphasize that there are a lot of wonderful safety things that can be put in place. There's lots of people, scientists, engineers, medical professionals from around the world working to make this a safer resource for us. So we thank you so much. And if anybody has questions, feel free to be in touch. Or is there any last minute questions? Okay. Is Colleen? Let's see, I'm not seeing Colleen's question.
Oh, no, I didn't.
This
have a
is
question.
Christy Pepper, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. I just wanted to add my name to the thing, but I can't because I'm driving. So maybe Colleen could, if need be, could you could I get the Google Doc information from you probably? Okay, thanks.
Okay, guys. All right.
Well, this has been really great. Thank you. And thank you so much to the Barneses for hosting this. It's been really informative.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank everyone for coming. Thank you, Stacy and John. And thank you so much, Dr. Chamberlain. This has been, this has just been a big pleasure, and it does a lot of good. Again, people don't have a lot of access to this information. So the more that they get it, the better, and healthier their lives will be. So we thank you. Okay. And you're muted for some reason. I can't hear you now.
Oh, I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, okay. All right. That's why you're. All
My
right.
lips were moving.
Your lips were moving. Okay, guys. Sleep well. Have a wonderful evening. Please be in touch if anybody has any questions. And thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.